House returns for legislative work now, members are going to be considering 5 bills, including a 90-day extension of the transportation programs that run out at the end of the week.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass Bill H. 2779 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 2779, a bill to exempt inter-affiliate swaps from certain regulatory requirements put in place by the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Garrett, and the gentlelady from Ohio, Ms. Fudge, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and to add extraneous material on this bill.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself now about, say, 2 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the legislation that is before us today ensures that American businesses will not be needlessly forced to use up capital that they need to create jobs and simply to satisfy some duplicative regulations. So under H.R. 2779, the inter-affiliates trades would be only exempt from costly margins, clearing, and real-time reporting requirements. See, swap trades facing non-affiliated counterparties would still be subject to all the other regulatory requirements under the proposed agency rules. So without this bill, companies could face double the margin in regulatory cost. To my point, last June the Office of the OCC, that's the control of the currency, estimated that the margin requirements under the proposed prudential regulation margin rules could conservatively cost $2 trillion, which could increase substantially if regulators force affiliates to post margins on trades between themselves. So without the relief of this bill, American companies face the prospects of having to post double margins on swap trades. Once it's swap trades among themselves, and secondly, when they trade these trades outside. And so the Stivers-Fudge bill provides the needed relief that we need. So this bill strengthens the ability of regulators to oversee the affiliate swap marketplace because those transactions must be reported still to a swap depository or the CFTC or the SEC. Either way, you see, Mr. Speaker, regulators will be able to monitor these transactions very closely. The bill also gives the SEC and the CFTC the power to regulate swap transactions that are structured as affiliate trades only for purposes of evading regulation. So to conclude, Mr. Speaker, I commend the efforts of my colleagues from both sides of the aisle this morning, and I urge my colleagues to support this bipartisan bill.
The gentlelady from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that 10 minutes be controlled by Ms. Moore of Financial Services.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you. Today we debate and will vote on H.R. 2779, a bill that addresses a critical issue facing American businesses. I want to thank my fellow Ohioan Steve Stivers and Ms. Moore and our collective staffs for all their hard work on this important piece of legislation. This bill that I co-introduced with my colleague, Mr. Stivers, will exempt derivatives trades between 2 affiliates of the same corporation from clearing, execution, and margin requirements. This legislation would prevent internal inter-affiliate swaps from being subject to requirements that were designed to apply only to certain external swaps. These internal swaps are used by many American corporations in multiple sectors of our economy. Under the Dodd-Frank Financial Reform Law, there is no distinction between inter-affiliate and external swaps. Regulation of inter-affiliate trades should reflect the economic reality that internal trades do not increase systemic risk. As our nation's economic recovery is getting underway, we need to ensure American businesses remain competitive. We all remember the financial crisis and the pain of recovery that is still evident today. We cannot and should not return to the wild days of Wall Street. That is why I voted for the Dodd-Frank law and why I continue to support it. However, we should allow American businesses acting in good faith to effectively manage risk. By failing to clarify these important distinctions within Dodd-Frank, we run the risk of stalling job growth and potentially passing costs on to consumers. Together with our colleagues on the Committee on Financial Services and the Committee on Agriculture, We have strengthened the language of the bill to ensure it cannot be used to evade other financial regulations. H.R. 2779 was approved by the House Financial Services Committee by a vote of 53-0, and the House Agriculture Committee passed it by unanimous voice vote. It is possible for Democrats and Republicans to work together on legislation that stands to benefit American businesses and our nation's economy. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on H.R. 2779, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Thank you. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And at this point, I yield 5 minutes to the sponsor of the underlying legislation, Mr. Stivers.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the gentleman from New Jersey for yielding me time. I'd also like to thank my fellow Ohioan, Ms. Fudge, for her hard work and support on this bill. And I'd like to thank Ms. Moore from Wisconsin for her hard work and recognition that she improved the bill. I'd also like to thank the chairs and ranking members of the Financial Services and Agriculture Committee and their staffs for their hard work on this bill. Mr. Speaker, this is bipartisan legislation that clarifies the Dodd-Frank Financial Reform Act, which by now recognizing that there's an important distinction between inter-affiliate swaps and market-facing swaps. While market-facing swaps carry risk, inter-affiliate swaps do not. They're simply an accounting practice used within corporate families to assign ownership of derivatives inside the corporate umbrella. Without providing this distinction, corporations using inter-affiliate swaps that manage their risk in a central way would be forced to pay up to 3 times for the way they do business. In fact, they would collateralize their derivatives against the market on one side and then both sides of the inter-affiliate swap, so they'd actually pay 3 times what you would pay if you didn't manage your risk in a centralized way. The irony of that is managing your risk in a central way actually provides better protection and allows for experts to manage your risk. The problem with that also is it would tie up working capital that could be used to create jobs here in the United States and get our economy moving and focus on our recovery. There are important protections in this bill as well that the lady from Ohio already alluded to. We put protections in this bill to make sure that businesses that utilize this provision are indeed truly affiliated. We also made sure that there are reporting requirements so that these swaps adhere to transparency in the marketplace. We also made sure that it's very clear that any attempt to use these provisions to evade provisions under the Dodd-Frank bill for someone who's just trying to evade the law and does not have true inter-affiliate swaps would not be allowed. And we also ensured that regulators keep their authority to manage the safety and soundness of America's financial institution. The bottom line is we should not overcharge businesses for an accounting method they use that does not generate additional risk. By passing this legislation, we're preventing these internal transactions from being subject to duplicative regulations that could drive jobs overseas and increase costs for consumers. This bill was reported unanimously in the Financial Services Committee, 53-0, and it passed by unanimous voice vote in the Agriculture Committee. I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of this legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
The gentlelady from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my friend and colleague from Ohio for all of his work. I think it's an excellent bill, and I'm certainly happy to have co-sponsored it with him. I would now, Mr. Speaker, yield to my colleague and friend from the great state of Wisconsin, Ms. Moore, a member of the Financial Services Committee.
The gentlelady from Wisconsin is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Ms. Fudge. I want to first of all like to thank Chairman Baucus and Ranking Member Frank and the subcommittee Chairman Garrett and Ranking Member Ms. Waters, Mr. Stivers, and Ms. Fudge on the Ag Committee for their leadership that kept the bill moving. For other members of the Financial Services Committee, Mr. Perlmutter, Mr. Himes, Mr. Miller, Mr. Dole, Mr. Gibson, among others, for all their input on this legislation. This is a bill, and some people here today, Mr. Speaker, may be surprised to know that it enjoys bipartisan support because it ensures, number one, the vitality of U.S. and global commerce by exempting inter-affiliate swaps or those swap transactions used internally by companies in all our districts, from clearing, margin, and execution requirements. But H.R. 2779 also preserves the all-important reforms of the over-the-counter swap markets as enacted as part of Dodd-Frank, while providing swap end users that exemption that's responsive to their legitimate business needs for flexibility, risk management, and price stability. Now, in Congress, 4 years is an eternity, but I have not forgotten the 2008 financial crisis and the human hardship that it caused and continues to cause in Milwaukee and all across America. And the work continues, and this bill is a part of that. I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, I was proud to be part of an effort that produced Dodd-Frank, legislation that will improve accountability and transparency in the financial markets, including the pre-Dodd-Frank unregulated over-the-counter derivatives market, which played a central role in the crisis. However, I did not vote for Dodd-Frank as retribution against Wall Street or for any punitive means. I voted for Dodd-Frank to enhance the function and transparency of markets and to promote prosperity for Americans going forward. For that reason, I'm happy to support H.R. 2779. A little bit of background about the critical need the bill addresses and how bipartisan collaboration produced the final bill. Now, swaps are versatile financial tools that have become instrumental for the management of risk and for allowing companies to more efficiently transact in global markets. Swaps aid companies to hedge and to mitigate things like interest rates and currency exposure, but also more exotic risks associated with unique markets and businesses. H.R. 2779 clarifies that end users, not investors, have the ability to hedge risk for legitimate business purposes. Now, the flip side of swaps are that they may also be used to acquire risk by investors. In that capacity, swaps allocate risk to parties that want to and are able to bear the risk. However, in the unregulated pre-Dodd-Frank world, over-the-counter swaps and derivatives lack transparency and allowed risk to pool and gather in ways that eventually help drive the financial crisis and create systemic risk. Dodd-Frank duly addressed the lessons of the financial crisis by pushing as many product types as possible to be centrally cleared and traded on electronic exchanges or other trading facilities, subjecting these swap dealers and major market participants to capital and to margin requirements, and requiring public reporting of transactions and pricing data of both cleared and uncleared swaps. H.R. 2779 does not, I repeat, does not disturb any of the important reforms accomplished in Dodd-Frank. Inter-affiliate swaps are simply transactions within a single group of affiliated entities. In other words, meaning entities that prepare financial statements on a consolidated basis. Therefore, inter-affiliate swaps do not add or subtract from overall systemic risk. Therefore, 2779, H.R. 2779, simply builds on the my original intent of voting for Dodd-Frank, the promotion of U.S. prosperity going forward. And through the process of drafting the bill, a number of revisions were adopted thanks to the thoughtful input of many of our colleagues. The definition of control, which is central to the issues of a legitimate inter-affiliate transaction, was clarified. Anti-evasion measures were added so that the exemption would not lead to abuse. Language was adopted that made sure Fed authority over inter-affiliate banks was preserved, as was language that clearly and explicitly states that the bill does nothing to disturb the existing regulatory regime for insurance companies. This is a good bill, Mr. Speaker. It has the backing of Republicans, Democrats, and industry end users of derivatives. I urge all my colleagues to back this legislation, and I yield back. to my colleague.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank the Speaker. And at this point, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Texas.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the gentleman from New Jersey for yielding time. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to express my strong support for H.R. 2779, the inter-affiliate swaps. Those swaps occur between entities within a single corporate structure as an important tool for the companies and to manage their risk. As a member of the House Agriculture Committee and the chair of the General Farm Commodities and Risk Management Subcommittee, I want to commend Mr. Stivers and Ms. Fudge for putting together a common-sense bill that will offer our businesses and agricultural firms certainty about a small but important aspect of the overall Dodd-Frank rulemaking. Centralizing a large organization's risk mitigation efforts can yield substantial economic benefits, and reduce a firm's overall credit risk. In addition to creating operating savings through economies of scale, these companies can also reduce a number of external-facing transactions altogether. By looking at a firm's entire risk portfolio, it's possible to find places where the risks overlap and offset one another, reducing the need for entering the market. Fewer swaps mean less money tied up in margin, clearing, and execution, and more money being spent on hiring Americans, buying supplies, and funding innovation. Unfortunately, ambiguity in the Dodd-Frank law could undo this innovative risk management strategy. If inter-affiliate swaps are treated the same as other swaps, then end users could wind up posting margin for the same swap twice, once for the public trade and once for the internal trade that assigns a swap to the appropriate business unit. Needless to say, posting margin for the same transaction type twice means that companies are likely to abandon the use of inter-affiliate swaps altogether, and with it the efficiencies that made the strategy attractive in the first place, and thereby driving up their business costs and overall risks. It's important to note that this legislation simply clarifies the intent of Congress. It does not repeal any of the market protections in Dodd-Frank. These internal swaps do not create risks and do not pose a systemic threat to financial markets. Instead, it protects an important tool American companies use to unlock the value of their limited resources. I want to thank both Mr. Stivers and Ms. Fudge for bringing forward this legislation, and Chairman Lucas and Chairman Baucus for shepherding it through both committees in a timely fashion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now you yield back.
The gentlelady from Ohio is recognized.
I continue to reserve, Mr. Speaker. I have no further speakers.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
I was hoping the gentlelady had one more speaker as we waited. I was going to reserve as we have one other speaker on the way, but let me just check. Without seeing him here, do we have it? Yeah. Without seeing him here, I will yield back the balance of our time.
The gentleman yields back his time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I just again want to thank everyone involved in this bill and ask my colleagues to please support it. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentlelady from Wisconsin is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, very, very happy to have been a part of this very important initiative. And with that, I would yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back the balance of her time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2779 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Mr. Speaker, we would ask for yeas and nays on.
The gentleman from New Jersey has requested the yeas and nays. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Suspend the rules and pass the bill, H.R. 2682, as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 2682, a bill to provide end-user exemptions from certain provisions of the Commodity Exchange Act and the Securities Exchange Act of 1934, and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Garrett, and the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and to add any extraneous material on the bill.
Without objection, so ordered.
And so at this point, I would like to yield myself 3 minutes for my remarks.
The gentleman is recognized.
So, Mr. Speaker, this bipartisan bill would do what? It would provide a clear exemption from margin requirements imposed by the Dodd-Frank Act on swap transactions for so-called end users, and who are derivatives to hedge their business risk and whose swap transactions really do not pose a systemic risk to the financial system. You know, following the really late night of the Dodd-Frank Conference committee deliberations, there were numerous assurances were made that margin would not be required on end users' transactions. Now, these assurances were subsequently followed up by formal letters and colloquies by the very same architects of the bill themselves. Everyone was told that Congress clearly intended for the language to exempt end users from the bill's margin requirements. Unfortunately, the regulators have interpreted a different way, and they have interpreted Dodd-Frank's somewhat rushed language as not providing a clear exemption for these end users. Now, Representative Grimm's bill here today finally provides American businesses with the certainty that they need to use derivatives to hedge against business risk. End users, you know, were not the cause of the financial crisis, and by any measure whatsoever, end users are not systemically significant. And who are these end users that we're talking about here? Well, they are the Main Street businesses from all over the country that represent all types of industries that rely on the use of derivatives to responsibly hedge their own business risk. And so they should not be, and we're not ever considered to be caught under the same umbrella, if you will, of regulations as banks are that are subject to posting margins on their swap transactions. So requiring end users to subject to a mandatory margin requirement, what it basically does is forces commercial entities to act like banks. And so without a margin exemption, the cost of hedging for these would rise dramatically. And that would needlessly tie up working capital that otherwise could and should be used to expand business investments, build factories, or create jobs. So I'll conclude on this. It is critical that we provide U.S. Main Street businesses across this country with this important certainty, with this clarity. And so I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this bipartisan bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I would like to note that I will be yielding 10 minutes of time to my colleague from the Ag Committee. Mr. Speaker?
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I do want to concur with those who've announced that bipartisanship is alive and well at the committee level and on the floor of this House today. I'd like to thank my colleagues on the other side, Mr. Garrett, Mr. Grimm, for their cooperation and our ability to work together. I'd also like to especially thank the staff of the full committee and the staff of each congressional office for the outstanding work the staff members have done. It is very difficult to get legislation to this point without the benefit of staff having had a helping hand, and we thank the staff. Mr. Speaker, the passage of the Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act of 2010 established a system for regulating the over-the-counter, that's the OTC, derivatives market. Authority is provided to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, and the banking regulators, which have been proposing the regulation that will eventually govern the OTC derivatives market. Previously, banks and other financial companies were able to amass considerable risk using OTC derivatives without reporting to the regulator or to the public. The Wall Street Reform Act requires that most derivatives transactions, primarily those between dealers, now be centrally cleared and exchange traded whenever possible, and that all transaction data be collected and publicly reported at clearinghouses or swap data repositories. The new rules are intended to allow regulators and the public to better analyze the derivatives risk-taking activities of banks and other financial companies. The new rules are not intended to hold in place onerous requirements on companies that use derivatives only as a means to hedge the risk of the company. H.R. 2682 clarifies Congress's intent when passing the Wall Street reform legislation by more clearly exempting end users that are only using swaps to hedge or to mitigate commercial risk. H.R. 2682 is also consistent with a colloquy between Representatives Frank and Peterson, as well as a letter from Senators Lincoln and Dodd, which noted that the reform legislation provided the regulators with sufficient authority to exempt end users from the margin requirements. This bill passed favorably out of both the House Financial Services Committee and House Agriculture Committee with strong bipartisan support. In no way should H.R. 2682 undo any of the important protections of reform legislation. Its purpose is to recognize that the end user's responsibility to use swaps as a part of their business. I congratulate Mr. Grimm and Mr. Peters, and I encourage you to support this bill. I will reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you. At this time, I would like to yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from New York, the author of the underlying legislation, and also for someone who has been instrumental in making sure that we could work in a bipartisan manner to get it done to the floor today.
The gentleman from New York is recognized.
I'd like to thank Chairman Garrett and thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of my legislation, H.R. 2682, the Business Risk Management and Price Stabilization Act of 2011. H.R. 2682, I'm very proud to say, is truly a bipartisan bill. And I would like to thank my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, especially Mr. Peters of Michigan, Mr. Austin Scott of Georgia, and Mr. Owens of New York for working with me on this extremely important issue. H.R. 2682 will clarify Congress's intent under the Dodd-Frank Act and provide an explicit exemption from having to post margin for true commercial end users of over-the-counter derivatives. Despite clear legislative history to the contrary, regulators continue to misinterpret the Dodd-Frank Act, giving them authority to impose margin requirements on end users. This bill will ensure once and for all that true end users are not subjected to margin requirements that Congress never intended to be applied, and make sure that regulators do not attempt to exercise authorities they were never granted by Congress in ways that will certainly do harm to the economy, specifically by diverting working capital away from investment and expansion, which fuels economic growth and certainly job creation. True end users are firms and companies that use derivatives to manage their various financial risk. For example, firms use these products to lock in the cost of raw materials that they're going to need in the future, which ultimately protects American consumers and creates jobs here in America. If true end users were required to post margin, their hedging costs may become so high that they could abandon the practice, leading to great price variations for raw materials and ultimately an increase in consumer prices for a whole host of products, from food to energy. At a time when constituents in Staten Island and Brooklyn are struggling with sky-high tolls, rising gas prices, they simply can't afford to pay more for items they rely on every day. Furthermore, this legislation will not only help to keep consumers' prices stable, but will also protect U.S. jobs. The cost savings end users will realize will not only be required to post margin, will free up capital for business expansion and job creation. In fact, it's been shown that imposing a 3% margin on over-the-counter derivatives held by S&P 500 companies could cut capital spending by $5.1 to $6.7 billion. That could lead to 100 to 130,000 job losses at a time when unemployment is 8.3%. This cannot be overlooked or overstated. Finally, without this clear exemption provided in this legislation, I believe that U.S.-based commercial end users may attempt to continue hedging and avoid posting margin by moving their derivatives products overseas. That would put U.S.-based financial institutions at a major disadvantage and, as a consequence, drive even more U.S. jobs overseas. In addition, this could also encourage regulatory arbitrage and actually increase systemic risk to a worldwide financial system. In closing, I ask that my colleagues support this common sense, bipartisan, pro-jobs legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of 2682, and I would like to thank Chairman Lucas and Ranking Member Peterson for their leadership on this important issue, as well as Mr. Scott from the Agriculture Committee, and our colleagues on Financial Services, Mr. Peters, Mr. Green, and, of course, Mr. Grimm. As a co-sponsor of H.R. 2682 and one of the authors of this legislation, I believe that the definition of an end user needs to be very specific to ensure that the CFTC implements the intent of Congress in exempting true end users from certain derivatives regulations. My district in upstate New York includes a number of entities that would be inappropriately captured as swap dealers under the proposed CFTC rules, including agricultural cooperatives, farm credit institutions, community banks, and electric cooperatives. Clearly, none of these entities were intended by Congress to be covered by these regulations. While each of them use derivatives to meet their business needs, they are not engaging in derivatives transactions as their primary business. If forced to comply with the increased margin and clearing requirements, it could make the services currently offered by end users cost prohibitive and impede their ability to conduct business, likely resulting in higher prices for my constituents and diverting capital that could otherwise be invested and used to help create jobs. These are all negative consequences that our economy can ill afford at this time. These financial instruments are particularly important for dairy farmers in my district who depend on their cooperatives to offer them tools to manage price, risk, and lock in margins. A local cooperative must have the ability to enter into swaps with its members and have affordable access to the market with other commercial counterparties to offset the risk of providing these swaps and forward contracts. Under the CFTC's proposed rules, the cooperatives would be regulated as a swap dealer, even though they are using derivative contracts to hedge commercial risk and support the viability of their members. There is no doubt in my mind that the derivatives markets needs to be regulated, and certain participants need to post margin to cover their trades in order to mitigate systemic risk throughout the financial system. However, this legislation will codify Congress's intent and ensure that commercial end users can continue to hedge against risk. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this important bipartisan legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you. Once again, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Conaway.
The gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and also thank you, Ms. Garrett, my friend from New Jersey. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in full support of H.R. 2682, the Business Risk Mitigation and Stabilization Act. As Chairman of the General Farm Commodities and Risk Management Subcommittee, I'm pleased to see this bill brought to the floor today. The Business Risk Mitigation and Stabilization Act will offer legislative clarification for one of the most important points that underlies Dodd-Frank, that non-financial end users should not be required to post margin. In hearings and letters, Congress could not have been clearer in its intent to exempt non-financial end users from being required to post margins for the risk mitigation transactions. Yet despite our clear intent, regulators have proposed rules that could result in margin requirements for these end users. Every dollar that a business has tied up in a margin account is a dollar they cannot spend on job creation or other productive business purposes. The Chamber of Commerce has recently estimated the cost of requiring these end users to post margin requirements, to post margins, could reach billions of dollars and cost over 100,000 jobs, all over the objections, clear and concise objections of Congress. This legislation simply affirms the original position of Congress that non-financial end users do not need to tie up scarce resources to participate in the swaps markets. Much like H.R. 2779, which we debated earlier, the Business Risk Mitigation and Stabilization Act would not undermine the established goals of Dodd-Frank. Non-financial end users represent less than 10% of the swaps market and have never posed a systemic risk to the broader financial markets. As we in Congress continue to advance legislation to put America back to work, we should prevent unnecessary regulatory burden on businesses. I'm pleased to support H.R. 2682 because it will do just that. I want to thank Mr. Grimm, Mr. Peters, Mr. Scott, Mr. Owens for sponsoring this important legislation. I'm pleased to note that it is a bipartisan effort and supported overwhelmingly by both committees. I also want to thank my chairman, Mr. Lucas, and Chairman Baucus for their work in clarifying Congress's intent for regulators with respect to end users. This legislation will protect jobs and businesses struggling to meet the multitude of mandates coming out of Washington. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. At this point, gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I will simply close by indicating that I concur with my colleagues. This legislation does enjoy the bipartisan support that we believe will help us to get a message to our members that it is a good piece of legislation that should be totally supported by the membership. So I would ask my colleagues and members of the Congress to please support this legislation. And I'll yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey is
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker. At this point, I think we just have one more speaker, and I yield the gentleman from Georgia 2 minutes.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of H.R. 2682, the Business Risk Mitigation and Price Stabilization Act of 2011. This bill provides a clear exemption for non-financial end users that qualify for the clearing exemption under Title VII of the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act. Across the country, consumers and businesses alike are confronted with risks that are associated with their day-to-day operations. To manage this risk, businesses use over-the-counter derivatives to provide price certainty and stability in many other conditions, which may arise or otherwise be less specific. Consumers, in turn, benefit from these business prudent risk management practices through lower volatility in the day-to-day prices of the products that they purchase. Due to the importance of protecting the consumer while providing a pro-growth environment for business, Congress provided an exemption from clearing and margin requirements for businesses and individuals who are not financial institutions. By providing this exemption, less than 10% of the capital involved in the derivatives market is relieved of the burdensome regulations and can be kept in the U.S. economy. To further the initial goal, H.R. 2682 clarifies Congress's intent of keeping much-needed capital in the U.S. markets, which plays an important role in the country's continued economic growth. For this reason, I ask my colleagues to support H.R. 2682 so businesses and individuals can manage their risk of day-to-day operations while not being constrained with the burdensome capital requirements. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
And I thank the gentlemen they have no other speakers, in which case then we yield back the balance of our time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2682? Those in favor say aye. As amended. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended and the bill is passed. Without objection, the motion is reconsidered. It is laid on the table.
And Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for the yeas and nays, recording vote.
The gentleman requests the yeas and nays. The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed.
We ready? All righty.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 3298.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 3298, a bill to establish the position of Special Assistant for Veterans Affairs in the Department of Housing and Urban Development and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentlelady from Illinois, Mrs. Biggert, and the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Illinois.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and to add extraneous material on this bill.
Without objection?
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise in support of H.R. 3298, the Homes for Heroes Act of 2011. Sadly, approximately 1/5 of our country's homeless population consists of veterans. In part, that's because readapting to civilian life is not always easy, even for some of our country's true heroes. But research shows that with a stable living situation, our veterans are far more likely to overcome other challenges. These are men and women who brave bullets and basic training to protect our country and our freedom. They have the will and the strength to overcome any obstacle, but it is our job to give them the tools. That is why it's essential that HUD and the VA work hand in hand to help our veterans get the housing assistance they have earned. The Home for Heroes Act of 2011, of which I am a co-sponsor and which was introduced by my colleague from Texas, Mr. Green, and my colleague from New York, Mr. Grimm, it establishes the position of Special Assistant for Veterans Affairs within HUD to effectively coordinate services among veterans and to serve as HUD's liaison to the Department of Veterans Affairs, the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness, state and local officials, and nonprofit service organization. The bill also requires HUD to submit a comprehensive annual report to Congress on the housing needs of homeless veterans and the steps undertaken by HUD to meet those needs. And H.R. 3298 takes these steps within existing budgetary constraints at no additional cost to taxpayers. Similar to H.R. 403 and H.R. 3329, the Home for Heroes Acts of 2008 and 2009, both of which passed this House, this legislation has strong bipartisan support. Once enacted, the legislation will help us better understand the needs of homeless veterans while fostering a better working relationship between HUD and the VA. The result will be better services for our heroes. And while we can never repay our veterans for the selfless sacrifices they've made, we can work to ensure that they have a place to call home when they come home. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I especially thank my colleague, Ms. Biggert, for her support of this legislation, as well as many other pieces of legislation that we've had the privilege of working together on. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank you as well for your co-sponsorship of the legislation. It means a lot to have bipartisan support for our warriors, those who are willing to go to distant places and risk their lives such that we may have better lives. Many of them do not return home as they left. Many of them find themselves living on the streets of life. And as a result, we believe it's necessary for us to do all that we can to help them secure the kind of home, the kind of housing, the kinds of services that they need so that they can reintegrate themselves into American life. This bill, the Homes for Heroes bill, will help to some degree with our goals and ambitions of helping them to have a place to call home. The bill does place a person in HUD whose sole responsibility it will be to monitor homelessness among our veterans. This person is to file an annual report with Congress on the status of homelessness among the veterans in this country and to give us some insight as to how we are progressing in eliminating and abolishing homelessness among our veterans. It's not going to do everything that we need to do, but it is a step in the right direction. And if I may say so, I'd like to commend HUD for what has been done thus far, because there is a person who does this sort of thing with HUD currently. But what we're trying to do now is institutionalize the position such that administrations may come and go, but the position will still be there, and our veterans will receive the kind of help that they merit and deserve. Mr. Speaker, in our country in 2009, approximately 136,334 people who self-identified themselves as veterans spent at least one night in an emergency shelter or transitional housing program. That speaks volumes about the amount of work that we have to do. While 136,000 may not seem like a lot to some people, I contend if we have but one veteran who is finding himself or herself in transitional housing or sleeping in a shelter or sleeping on the streets of life, I think we have work to do. This bill will help us with our veterans who are doing this, who are sleeping in this transitional housing. I would also add that our veterans compose about 16% of the homeless adults, while they are 8% of the American population. 8% of the population, but of those who are homeless, they are 16%. This, of course, is something that we cannot continue to tolerate. So I'm going to beg that all of my colleagues, please, give serious consideration to this piece of legislation. It will not break the bank. It may not do all that we'd like to have done, but it's a step in the right direction, and somebody will be helped as a result of what we do today. I beg that my colleagues please support this legislation. I thank Ms. Biggert for the outstanding work that she has done. I again especially thank staffers who worked with us on this piece of legislation, and I can say candidly, Mr. Speaker, that but for the assistance of our staffers, we might not be standing here today. They do make a difference, and I would have the veterans know that behind every member we have staffers who are working to help them return to our homeland and integrate themselves or reintegrate themselves into our society. I will reserve and take a moment and hear my colleague.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from Illinois is recognized.
We have no further speakers on this side of the aisle, so if the gentleman would like to close.
Well, I would simply close by saying this. Mr. Speaker, thank you again for your support of this piece of legislation, and I would hope that my colleagues will give it the kind of consideration that our warriors are giving to us when they decide that they are willing to go to distant places and make great sacrifices for us. Please give it consideration. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Woman from Illinois.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time. Let me just say that I would really like to commend the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, for all of his hard work on this issue. And it is really nice to have these bills that are bipartisan nature, and certainly homelessness is something that we all care about and would like to find a way to end homelessness, and there's different categories in that, and I think that the veterans certainly is very, very important. So with that, I have no further requests for time and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 3298? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Mr. Speaker, I object to the vote on the grounds that a quorum is not present, and I make a point of order that a quorum is not present.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20 and the Chair's prior announcement, further proceedings on this motion will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 4014.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 287, H.R. 4014, a bill to amend the Federal Deposit Insurance Act with respect to information provided to the Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentlelady from Illinois, Mrs. Biggert, and the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Illinois.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and to add extraneous material on this bill.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, at this time I would like to yield to the sponsor of this bill, the gentleman from Michigan, I always do that, Michigan, Mr. Huizenga, for such time as he may consume.
The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to my colleague, might not have been the right state, but it was the right pronunciation. That doesn't happen often, so thank you. And Mr. Speaker, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, a massive new branch of government created under the Dodd-Frank Act, fails to safeguard proprietary information given to the Bureau by regulated entities. I rise today in support of my bill, H.R. 4014, which will create more peace of mind for financial institutions while offering more oversight and consumer protections to hardworking taxpayers. If you remember one thing, remember this. We all agree on stringent consumer protections. This bill is a common-sense measure that adds necessary oversight to the Bureau. Specifically, H.R. 4014 would immediately close a loophole in the law that was created under the creation of the CFPB. Currently, information collected by the CFPB from financial institutions is not protected by the same confidentiality provisions that other financial regulators are required to provide. Additionally, we must ensure parity between state bank supervisors and other state regulatory agencies that oversee non-banks at the state level and make sure that they are afforded the same protections. We need a real solution to ensure that privileged information will not be intentionally disclosed to any third party. H.R. 4014 would protect that data that depository and non-depository institutions provide during an oversight exam, therefore enhancing the Bureau's supervision process and giving financial institutions the much-needed certainty and the information will be kept private. Unlike current statutes regarding other federal agencies accessing relevant information, the Dodd-Frank Act failed to provide such protections despite the CFPB's claim that they won't or wouldn't share such information. The simple truth is, if we don't pass H.R. 4014, that the CFPB could legally share privileged information with third parties. Absent this specific congressional legislation, the courts have permitted this practice of sharing in the cases of other federal agencies. Although the Bureau has said that they are prepared to take all reasonable and appropriate steps to protect proprietary information, we cannot be sure. Therefore, we must pass this bill to restrict them from doing so. Even President Barack Obama's appointed director of the CFPB, Richard Cordray, recently testified that it was, quote, an oversight and that he would be, quote, supportive of a legislative solution to ensure privileged information is not leaked to third parties through the CFPB. My bill is that real legislative solution. This is a common-sense fix that will put an end to the needless uncertainty and legal costs to both the CFPB and to financial institutions. Mr. Speaker, while I believe this issue must and will eventually be addressed in the Dodd-Frank Act, this is a very important step. I urge swift adoption of this important legislation to restore genuine accountability to the CFPB and for delivering a more efficient and effective government for America's hardworking taxpayers. I look forward to working with my Senate colleagues to see that this omission in the Dodd-Frank Act is quickly rectified and sent to the President for his signature. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume. Mr. Speaker, H.R. 4014 is a good piece of legislation, and it is designed to protect proprietary information, which is exceedingly important in the business world. This bill ensures that when an institution submits confidential information to the CFPB, the information will remain confidential. This bill is in line with existing law for other financial regulators. We have confirmed that the CFPB believes this fix to be acceptable. The bill is identical to legislation introduced by the Senate Banking Committee Chairman Johnson and Ranking Member Shelby. This legislation will give financial institutions legal certainty when turning over data to the CFPB. Mr. Speaker, current law states that a bank does not waive confidentiality and thereby should not have to risk its disclosure of information to other parties. These parties are sometimes engaged with litigation against each other. This piece of legislation will assure a party that its information given to the CFPB will not end up in the hands of another party that may be engaged in litigation. This is but one example. This bill is designed to protect proprietary information. I want to thank my colleague for the outstanding job that he has done in presenting this piece of legislation. I thank Ms. Biggert for, again, showing the bipartisanship that has helped us to bring this legislation to the floor. And at this time, I'll reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume. I rise in support of H.R. 4014, a bill to ensure that confidential private information collected by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or CFPB, remains confidential. Introduced by my colleague from Michigan, Mr. Huizenga, this legislation addresses a crucial oversight within Dodd-Frank Act. Under current law, many supervised institutions have expressed concern that supplying privileged information to the CFPB at the government's request could void attorney-client and work product privileges against third parties. Even the new CFPB director, Richard Cordray, as was talked about, has acknowledged constitutional concerns and indicated that he would be supportive of a legislative solution, and H.R. 4014 is that solution. Mr. Huizenga's bill makes it explicitly clear that providing privileged material to the CFPB does not waive attorney-client or work product privileges with respect to third parties. It also guarantees that any privileged matter that the CFPB shares with other federal agencies will remain privileged. This bill has earned nearly universal support from Republicans, Democrats, regulated institutions, the regulator, Senator, and members of the House. On February 16th, our House Financial Services Committee passed this bill by voice vote. Mr. Speaker, this bill should be on the President's desk in a matter of weeks and not months. Chairman Johnson and Ranking Member Shelby of the Senate Banking Committee have introduced an identical measure, S. 2099, which also awaits consideration. Passing this legislation today marks an important milestone. It is the first time that both the House and the Senate members on both sides of the aisle are acknowledging and correcting a serious flaw in the Dodd-Frank Act. With that, I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 4014 and commend Mr. Huizenga for the hard work on this issue. And I have no further speakers, if the gentleman would like to close.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have no additional speakers, and I will simply encourage my colleagues to support the legislation and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas yields back. The gentlelady from Illinois.
Mr. Speaker, with that, I would again commend the sponsor of this bill, Mr. Huizenga, and I thank Mr. Green for managing this bill. And with that, I